Welcome to the Uncommonality Podcast. I'm Keon, here with my co-host Sal, to bring you into a community of extraordinary entrepreneurs and innovators. We dive deep into the journeys that have defined them, from hard-earned insights to the hurdles that make each success story real. Today, we're excited to host Griffin Gervais, founder of Come Home Collective. With nearly a decade as a teacher and school administrator, Griffin launched his organization to transform education by equipping leaders and educators with tools to foster emotional intelligence and human-centered learning. He believes empowering educators is the key to creating impactful, thriving experiences for every student. Griffin's mission is rooted in the belief that by investing in the development of educators, we can transform the educational experience for every student to help them thrive personally and professionally. Listen, share, and we're happy to have you be a part of the journey. Thanks. All right, welcome to the Uncommonality Podcast, everybody. I am Keon Alberto with my co-host here, the amazing Sal Perez, and welcome to episode 4. Today we have Griffin Gervais with us from Come Home.
Thank you.
And we are very, very grateful to have you here, Griffin. I think our two businesses kind of align and complement each other a little bit. So I think I draw a lot of inspiration from when I learned about it, what you do.
Sure.
And I think it's very, very amazing. So I just want to say thanks for having us. I'm sure Sal wants to give a few words as well before we dive into this.
No, I think I'm excited for this one because you're going to touch on some things that are prevalent, especially in today's society, especially with everything going on, everything with like mental health. What I think, it's kind of like a divine timing type of thing. Like it has its purpose in being released when it's being released, and you getting the chance to talk about it. So I'm excited for it.
Administration changes, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's a lot when it comes to what it is that you're doing that will start to shape the scope of 2025, which I think can be very exciting for you. I'm sure you're very prepared for what's coming and what's going to be happening. So why don't we kind of just dive into this and tell them a little bit about your personal story, your background, and kind of how you got to the place where you're now running Come Home and you're making a big impact in the community.
Yeah, so I don't identify as an entrepreneur. I know a lot of people will have conversations with me about that, and I've actually started to kind of embody it a little bit, but at the core, I'm an educator. Through and through, that's what my passion is. That's what my mission is just to educate. And that all started, I've known for a long time that I wanted to be in education. It started in high school, actually. I ended up doing an internship where I thought I wanted to be a PE teacher.
Okay.
And I learned really quickly I didn't. And that was probably just because I had a sports background, but it was really driven by a teacher that I had who inspired me to just actually care for being in school and care about learning. And so I knew really early that I wanted to be an educator, and that quickly just kind of evolved, and I went to school, undergrad for education, and then started to be a teacher as a New York City public school teacher. That evolved to a school administrator down here in the Carolinas, and now the founder of Come Home. And I work specifically on emotional intelligence development and integration into curriculum, schools, and public education.
How did you get passionate into that? Why? That's a very specific lane within education. Why'd you pick that?
Yeah. So, one of the things I learned really quickly early on in my career was and actually I was just talking about this the other day with someone. My entire teaching experience as a classroom teacher, I never taught anyone who looked like me. No one ever looked like me. They were from different backgrounds, different communities, everything that was basically, if you were to look at my upbringing, complete opposite. And I learned that my training and my background was all about how to actually deliver content in an effective way to get them to be reading, writing, and doing things like math. What I wasn't prepared for was, how do you actually build relationships with these people? How do you actually start to build trust with them? How do you start to actually understand who they are, what they're going through, what they need? And I learned on the fly early in my career that that needed to happen. They weren't coming to school ready to learn every day. They weren't coming to school going, I'm really excited about math class. They were coming to school with a lot of situations that they were dealing with in life. And my role, and this is just what I believed my role was I needed to figure out a way to connect with them as humans, to support them as humans, and to ultimately empower them as humans. That was just my mission. I think a lot of that has to do with my personality just in general, but it was challenging because I wasn't equipped with the right tools to actually do that. It wasn't until I had a principal who saw the work that I was trying to do, started to really pay attention to the environment I was trying to create, and ultimately was like, hey, Griffin, you know that there's some research and actually work happening around these sort of skills, different tools, different resources that you can utilize in order to foster this sort of community and care and environment. And I was like, oh, really? And that's when I was introduced to Yale and their Center for Emotional Intelligence. And so that partnership and that learning and that training from a classroom teacher all the way to they actually supported us in integrating at a school level when I was a school administrator. That partnership had really trained me and properly equipped me to be able to really bring these skills to the foundation of education, because my belief is if those things don't exist, nothing else will actually happen. No learning will happen. None of that will actually take place. If we put the human first and we pour into them, they feel safe. They feel like they belong. They feel empowered. They feel connected. They feel valued. Then they're going to give you all they got.
Yeah, I think that's a key theme that I think a lot of people, especially nowadays, really, I think there's a lot of ugly out there sometimes that gets highlighted and not enough positivity that gets highlighted. I
Sure.
think what you just said kind of sparks something of like, find people that like see something in you, even though sometimes you may not see it in yourself yet. Right. And I
Exactly.
think that what you just highlighted there like really depicts that perfectly, because you're looking at these kids saying, there is so much potential in you that you do not even see it yet. You just need the environment to kind of grow and to bloom and to show. Right.
And they believed that their circumstances were already set.
Oh,
They,
yeah, that's a great point.
right, whether it be families or whether it be the student themselves, they had already created this story around how it already went, given maybe their financial statuses, the neighborhood they grew up in, whatever that may be, whatever their disposition was. And that really never sat well with me, because I was like, why? Like, why can't you change that? What do we have to do to allow you to see outside of your circumstances, knowing anything is possible?
Okay. So I'm seeing two things here. You're definitely an entrepreneur and business owner.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, I told you I'm getting more comfortable with it.
The reason why I say that, even though it's kids that you're looking at and trying to impact, I'm pulling two things from that, just as one myself and understanding what you're doing. It is one, understanding the concept that you sell emotions and you sell people, you don't sell product.
Correct.
So in your case, your product is the education you're trying to teach them. Well, in order to do that, you need to sell the emotional safety, support system, and comfort that they know they can trust you to be able to listen to you and believe you.
Yep.
And the second thing from that I'm pulling is the idea of changing mindset into positivity, right? So you guys can change your environments. You can do whatever it is. And it's the self-talk of positive mindset. Well, manifestation exists. If you believe that that is your situation, well, it will be.
Sure.
If you want to change that, well, then it'll change.
Yeah.
And so I think that's actually really, really, really cool. So we're very early on into this journey, and we're already pulling some really cool business pieces and keys from this. So like,
Yeah.
how did you come to these types of things? And then like, what were kind of like the strategies you did to try to get these kids into a comfortable place and get them out of these mindsets and headspaces? Because I know that it can be very, very difficult. I have family that comes from places that live those types of lives. I know a lot of people that come from places like that, and it's hard to have perspective when life is hard.
Yeah. 100%. what I would say to that is I think it was all rooted in taking the time to go slow. I had to spend a lot of time truly understanding. If I assumed anything or I made any sort of assumption about someone's reality or what they were experiencing, then automatically there was going to be some sort of gap in connection there. Because what I had to really understand about myself was while I could empathize, I didn't get it. I never had lived it. I
Right.
didn't know. Even then, even as a New York City public school teacher, I was working in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and another school I was at was in the Bronx. And I would get back on the 4 train and head back to the Upper East Side. Like
Mm,
I wasn't in their environment
yeah.
living. I was there every day, but I wasn't living there. And so one of the things I really had to do was take the time to start to truly understand who these people were, understand what lit them up, understand where they were struggling, understand just all the ins and outs of them. And that there was simply about slowing down and building relationships. That was it. Building relationships one by one, right? It wasn't about the work. It was like, hey, like what do you like to do on the weekend? Like what are you doing outside of here? Or yo, I saw you like shooting hoops the other day. Can I come shoot hoops with you at recess one day? Like
Yeah.
things like that.
Well, when I hear that, I hear a lot of, you have to have, and I can tell this just immediately, even from our first conversation, empathy. Like you have to have a certain innate level of empathy in there to feel for them and to say like, hey, I do not understand where you come from. Kind of like that self-realization you came to of like, I pop in, I pop out, and I'm back in the Upper East Side already, right? But you're not living there and you understand circumstances might be different.
Sure.
Have you always had that level of empathy from a young kid age? Or I guess, right, because there's certain, for me, you can't teach that. You cannot teach someone to care.
Yeah.
Right, to that extent that you're describing now. You cannot, there's a lot of teachers out there that go through and check the boxes, right?
Sure.
And there's not, depending on where you're at least where I'm from, not enough that would go in it and submerge themselves in the culture, submerge themselves in what the kids that they are teaching actually do.
Sure.
Right? So where did you pick that up, or where did you get that? Maybe family or upbringing or
Yeah, I think one, it was always kind of instilled in me just the acceptance of people from family and just, giving everyone an even playing field and just having that perspective for people. I think another piece of it too, and actually I've never even shared this anywhere. It just kind of popped up to me as you were talking is I'm an only child. So I never had siblings day in and day out. And so I think what that started to create for me was a lot of awareness of just observing. I would just observe people. I would be watching interactions with adults, interactions with kids. My friends all had siblings, so watching them interact with one another. And I think just through that, I started to really start to feel and start to see how people were feeling or how people were perceiving things and things like that. I wasn't able to obviously put language to that.
sure.
That didn't exist, but I think just being very observant at a young age, because I didn't have that sibling right there to like kind of be in it with, I just kind of had to watch it all.
Yeah.
I think that, as well as just the family piece, kind of coupled that together.
Yeah. I want to dive into this. I love what's happening here
Yeah.
with a lot of the correlations that
I know
we're
exactly
finding.
what you're gonna say.
I know,
yeah.
that's why I looked at you. So today, as we're recording this, we're having Courtney Bensinger's podcast release.
Okay.
Courtney thinks that one of the biggest things that allowed her to get to where she is the fact that she was a single child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said that, my eyes lit up right away. I was like, oh my goodness.
Like the timing of it was perfect.
This is the only child podcast.
Yeah, honestly,
Yeah.
yeah, we're only gonna have only
You're
child.
only
from
gonna
now
have
on.
only child.
Seems like it, and that'll be the commonality that leads to success. But it's very interesting because she took it from a different direction.
Yeah.
She saw it as where you went and looked out other ways. She had people looking at her. So her perspective of why she thought it was her superpower was the ability to keep pushing and doing new things and wanting to keep improving herself, because she said that her parents were always her biggest support system. They were always
Yeah.
kind of pushing her and wanting her to do things and also doing things. And so for her, being able to have that support system behind her, the belief behind her, kind of gave her the confidence in herself
Oh,
to kind of go and roll off her own thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Very,
sorry.
very similar. Very similar. Like everything that you're saying resonates with me. My just was flipped in the sense of
the
yeah,
perspective of
yeah,
it.
the perspective of I just really started to get a pulse on people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like when did you reckon, like how does that implement itself into today? Like where does that come from, that mindset of, okay, I'm looking at other people, I'm seeing what they're doing and it's inspiring me to do what I do, things like that. Where do you see that coming into today? Because there's a clear correlation with what you're doing
Yeah.
and how you got there, but if you can spell it out a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, so one of the things I'd say is everything that we're talking about around your emotions, perspective, empathy, all these different skills, you actually can be taught them. That's one of the things that I would debunk around, well, it's just innate. No,
Really?
sure, it could be a personality trait that is a little bit more common for you or one that just comes more naturally, but it also can be taught. And that's where the work that I'm doing comes into play, because you'll hear a lot of people say, well, so and so is a great listener, but pff, you should, that one over there, like, this person, especially I'm thinking from a school lens, it's like, this teacher just doesn't care, or this teacher does really care. And it's like, it's not final. Like that's just not them. They can actually grow that. It's a skill set. It's a muscle. It's like anything else. If you want to be, I think we have a common theme here around soccer. If you want to be a better soccer player, you practice, right?
Yeah.
And you could develop. Same exact thing with your emotional intelligence. You just need the skills, the reps, the tools, and the practice.
100%. Actually, you mentioned that. One of my favorite books of all time. We don't have it here because Chupa ate it. My dog ate it. Just like my dog ate my homework. It's called The Attributes.
Okay.
Did you know it?
Nope, never heard of it.
Okay.
But I like the title.
So it's called The Attributes, and it's going to tie completely this directly.
Okay.
And the author, I forget, it's been a while, I forget her name. Maybe Rick Divney, but that may be somebody else. I don't recall. He was a Navy SEAL by trade, and he was basically explaining that we believe inherently we're certain ways. No. Everything is like the volume bar on your sound for music. You can slide it left, and you can slide it right. I was trying to think of perspective. You can slide it left and you can slide it right.
Sure.
And to be able to do that, you have to have perspective on what it is and a goal of what you want to accomplish. So it's like, I want to be more empathetic, for example.
Sure.
How do you be more empathetic? Well, maybe start with listening more rather than thinking and processing when people are speaking.
Yeah.
Try to put yourself in people's shoes. Like there's a lot of different skills that you can do, because eventually these attributes are all habits. Being empathetic is a habit. Being caring is a habit. And so what you have to do is develop the skills within that and slide it as much as you want, left or right, depending on what it is that you want to accomplish.
100%.
But he agrees with that. I read that and I was like, yup, 100%. I completely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think because I'll be honest, I'm one of the people in the camp that I have a certain mentality of like, when it comes to empathy, when it comes to certain, I would say, soft skills,
Sure.
I would say like caring, being able to, the listening, I think that's a good one that you're absolutely right. I think that one can change, but like having that natural care
Sure.
and genuinely caring about someone. I've just always been of the camp that like, you have it or you don't. Some people care and some people don't. Some people
Sure.
are selfish, some people are unselfish. That's just the nature of the beast, and that's the way everyone, the world is.
Sure.
But as you're talking through that, I can kind of like see your case for that. I mean, obviously you've made a beautiful business out of it and like helping, these people build these skills so that they can then better serve from like a lower layer.
Yeah.
So I'll self-reflect here now that I'm thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, I think I'm one of those people who have been like, yeah, maybe you can't teach.
So the other piece I would add to that, because you had asked me that question and I went into that first part, but the other piece of it is actually what Courtney was talking about. When, right, at a young age, it was all about, I was looking out, right? But I didn't go in, I was going out. And I think one of the things that allows people to really develop, nurture, and grow those skill sets is when they're able to apply it to themselves rather than other people. You can't take someone who's unempathetic and go, hey, I need you to be empathetic with Sal. And then go, okay, cool. I'm going to go be empathetic. That's not going to be natural. That's not going to actually translate. It's got to start with self.
Yeah.
Right. You have to be able to apply these skills to you in your everyday life, because when you start to notice differences, when you start to understand deeper who you are, why you feel certain ways, how your life and experiences have shaped your beliefs and values and things like that, and you start to truly build a toolkit to navigate your own experience, you're going to show up 100 times better for those outside of you. So the other piece I would say to that, to your question, was, as I've gotten older and I've had training and experiences and reps of doing this work, it's very much go here first before you go outside there, because most people want to start there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have to set a foundation to build a home.
Yeah, 100%.
And a strong foundation is what's going to last. A fragile foundation is going to crumble.
Yeah.
And I think that building that foundation of looking within yourself, right, it just makes intuitive sense. You were like, okay, clearly something's not connecting here. Let me look at myself to be able to make that difference. And that's what you ended up doing, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's spot on.
I think that ties closely to what we were talking about with Juan. Juan's episode is going to release. Juan Garzon, his episode's going to release after this one does.
Yeah. And
one of the things he was mentioning is as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, when you're pitching, right? We're talking about his pitch breakfast. It's important that when something doesn't hit, it is not their fault. You're not looking at them. You look at, what did I do wrong?
Yes.
Right? Why didn't I get the message across the right way? Why didn't I make it click in a certain way? Right? And I think that the timing of it is perfect, because you're looking at it from an emotional intelligence lens, but the thematic message maintains the same. Right? Of like, look inward. What did I do wrong before I go blaming other people? Or why can't they get this? Why don't they understand this conceptually?
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's like very key as well.
And that was a lot of the work, whether it was with students, like students I particularly taught, or the adults as a school administrator. So much of it was about them. Right. And even, right, take the context of education out of it. So much of our daily lives is often the finger point. Well, this didn't go well because of this, or this because of this, right, all of this. And sure, while totally experiences and circumstances can play roles, let's start here, right? Yeah. Let's start with self. Sure, maybe you had something happen on the playground, or maybe, a student is giving you a hard time and they're really disrupting class. Well, before we start to point fingers at everything else, let's reflect. Let's take a moment to think about what your role in it was.
I think that's actually very, very powerful. I think it takes a big person to be able to do something like that, and also a sense of, obviously, humility to be able to look into yourself and think that there's a level of improvement. But on the other side of that coin is love, right? You have to be able to have self-love for yourself to be able to continue improving yourself and growing. And I think that if you love yourself, you're easily able to look within, because you understand that this is a growth process, not something where you're going to put yourself down.
Yeah.
Whereas if you might be a little more fragile mentally or something like that, you may not want to do something like that, because your perspective on how you're processing that may end up being more negative. Yeah. In which case, like, maybe start with thinking more positively, looking within, and that is something that can help you get through those types of things, because the outcome's always going to be positive.
Yeah. I'd say, just as you were sharing that, something that was coming up for me was, I think for me, the biggest skill to continue to develop, and I think it's just a hard one for all of us in general, it kind of goes with the assumption, but don't judge.
Yes.
Right? Especially holding space, developing relationships, looking at self, or holding space for other people. What's being shared, or just what is coming up, how can we not judge it? How can we just see it for what it is, right? And come with grace, compassion, love, to really support. And that's what it's rooted in. It's rooted in support. Yeah. Constantly.
For someone who might struggle with that, how do you start that? Or what does that look like? Like, being able to show up and be in that space. Like, what is that? How do you do that?
Of not judging, is that what you're talking about?
Like, how do you show up and just be able to do that? Or where do you start the practice of starting to do something like that?
Yeah, so I'm going to bring it back to self, right? You
amazing.
You got to know you. Yeah. You got to know you. So, right? You have to understand your biases. You have to understand how some of the beliefs and value systems that you have or have been taught through upbringing or whatever that may be, how that's shaping your actions and behavior. Because one of the best things, and one of the things that punched me in the face, it was like one of those moments where I was just like, whoa. When I was training with Yale, one of the things that they kind of put the stake in the ground in is every action is driven by an emotion. So every single
Yeah.
thing you say, do, behave, whatever you do is driven by an emotional experience. So how well do you actually understand that emotional experience? Because think about how reckless you are if you don't.
Yeah.
You're flying off the rails,
Yeah.
right?
100%.
They call it crashing out nowadays.
Yeah. People crash out. And I mean,
Right?
in the first episode, we talked about the two, like how every people think, I'm in wealth management. And one of the things I talk to my clients about the most is not so much the spend itself or not so much the money leaving the door, but more so why the money is leaving out the door,
100%.
right? Like what emotion, what is it that you feel about yourself? What is it about you feel about your situation that's dictating? And the same thing goes for business, like what business owners do, how they start, what decisions they make, what paths they take is all driven behind underlying emotions. And we talked about that on the intro
Selling
podcast.
emotions.
Yeah, selling emotions.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
And so, right, going back to, well, how do you work on not judging? You got to know yourself. You got to know your biases. You got to know your values. You got to know all those things, because what's going to happen is you're going to be challenged. You're going to be triggered. You're going to find yourself in moments. And the idea isn't, and one of the things I always have to dispel for people, it's not about experiencing certain emotions or being perfect. It's about the tools and the awareness. Because if I'm sitting and having a conversation, but I've done enough work on myself and I'm getting shared something that maybe triggers something in me, whether through a past experience, my self-awareness will allow me to create space in that moment. To pause, to not react and actually respond. Because then I can go, oh, okay, I can access tools.
So let me ask you something. And obviously this is probably opinionated, but could be objective. Do you think judgment is a projection?
100%.
Right?
Yeah. One of the things is our perception is our reality, right? So our experiences, everything around our beliefs and values and what we know to be true or what we believe is truth is simply shaped on kind of our upbringing and all those different pieces. And so when we look outward, when we look at others, when we look at different pieces of society or education or people, they're simply a mirror of what we perceive them to be.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that perception can come from, and the reason why I say projection can come from a place of, well, maybe they're doing something you're not. Maybe they're a way that you aren't, and you're kind of like trying to bring that down because you're feeling bad about yourself, which comes back to the love yourself thing.
Yes.
And the focus on yourself thing. It's like, well, if you're judging other people, there's probably something in that that's not necessarily the best thing that you're doing for yourself or thinking of yourself.
Yeah.
So instead of going like that, go like this and figure it out, and then you'll have a growth projection.
Yeah. And it helps you, control what you can control. Right? You can't control how other people behave. You can't control how other people act. You're going to drive yourself insane if you're constantly trying to control the outside world, and how people show up and what people do. And so there's a lot of empowerment going here, because when you go to yourself and you understand self and realize that your emotions are driving your actions, you actually have complete control over everything.
That's deep. I like that one. I like that one a lot. Like keeping it within your control, what you can control, and all from that self-introspection, right? All from that self-reflection. I think that goes deep. One thing I wanted to go back to about, teaching in areas of minority, right? And how, they may not prioritize education the same way. Everyone comes from a different story. I don't want to use like a broad paintbrush here, but, for the sake of the example.
Let's change minority to opportunity.
In what sense?
Or I don't think it necessarily needs to be minorities that are involved where Griffin may not be drawing from in these situations. Like, I think it's not always a minority community. I think it's a community of just opportunity, having less,
Sure.
not being able to do as much or have as much support as others may to progress and have the platform to do
Sure.
whatever you want, mess up 100 times and be okay,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So I would say let's change minority to maybe underprivileged or opportunistic, something like that.
Sure. So I mean, I would say in that same scenario, the underprivileged, maybe not so much. That's a great call out because
Yeah,
like
yeah.
minority may not be the right term, so to speak,
Mhm.
but in the underprivileged areas or people that may not have those opportunities, I look at myself for like mental health, like how I was raised. I grew up in a very
Mhm.
Latiny area, and it was kind of like it doesn't matter how you feel, like just get the job done type of thing,
Sure.
you know? And I'm not saying that's healthy, I'm not saying anything, but that's just what the reality was at the time. And I
Yeah.
know a lot of other areas might experience the same thing, right? A
Sure.
little bit more hard nosed, a little bit more like feelings second, results first, feelings second, job first. How do you break that barrier? Like,
Yeah.
because that in and of itself, I can imagine is a challenge.
Yeah. So I think the big thing here is an understanding that all of your emotions are simply feedback and information. And so what ends up happening is the only reason why we find ourselves in those situations or society tries to put pieces to that is because there's actually judgment around what those emotions mean, right? If you're sad, we're judging that based on what we perceive sadness to be like. If you're happy, right? So all the different things. And what 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 we what we start to do there is we start to say, hey, those don't exist because those are going to block you. And what I actually, going back to that statement around every emotion is every action is driven by an emotion, is the idea that we can actually use your emotions as feedback and information to leverage any circumstance.
How?
Yeah,
Why?
explain that.
So a perfect example I love to use is rage,
Okay.
right? Most people, when it comes to anger or rage, would be like stay away, right? Because oftentimes the judgment or the association with rage is a negative consequence.
Aggression.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Along those natures.
Yep. So one of the things that we talk about is, well, if you're actually experiencing rage, it's probably rooted in you stand for something. It's probably rooted in maybe inequality, injustices, different things that exist because it's really sparking this passion within you. So let's actually discern why that rage is there, right? Let's start to unpack a little bit why you're so angry. And then what's a way to do that in a way that makes your voice or makes what you believe to be true known in a way that serves you and those around you, right? So a perfect example of that is someone peacefully protesting, right? Showing up for something that they believe in and going, you know what? I'm not a big fan of blank because of my experiences, my background, my beliefs, whatever it is. And so I'm going to make sure my voice is heard. That's a phenomenal way.
Yeah. They're also in control of that rage.
They're
and
also
doing
in
it
control,
peacefully.
right?
Yeah.
So they're not showing up and punching people in the face.
Yeah.
Because that's not going to serve them. That's not how they want to show up ultimately. The thought is, and the idea is, they actually just don't know what to do with that information. They're experiencing the emotion, they're getting the information. They don't have tools to figure out, well, how does actually rage show up for me in this moment? Like, what can I do? Right?
Rage is your best friend. I read this in a Buddhist passage once. And I'll change rage to anger just so it's more true to the tone, but it's same thing. Anger is the truest form of self-love. I'm not saying go blow some stuff up, hit people, like be aggressive, but anger is the truest form of self-love. If you can look at yourself and understand that you're angry, you're in a mode of rage, you're in something that's not positive, that means that whatever it is that is causing that is not serving you to some capacity.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that it's that fault, not saying it's your fault, but it's something to then dive into.
Yeah.
And so maybe take a step back and look at it and dive into that. Okay, well, why do I feel this?
Yeah.
Why do I feel these ways? And then you'll start to figure out, okay, well, I'm feeling this way because of this, this. And then you'll realize, well, that's not serving me. What do I want to do about it?
Yeah. So think about that from a perspective shift lens, right? You're angry at work. Something's going on at work. Your boss is pissing you off.
Yeah.
Whatever that may be. The idea or what we've been taught was, hey, take that anger, put it to the side. Don't let it interfere with what you're doing and just keep doing your job.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can do that. But guess what? That's still there. That's still boiling.
Yeah.
And here, and I'm going to sound like a broken record again. Every action is driven by an emotion. So you better believe that rage, even though you're trying to be aware of it, is showing up maybe in little remarks, maybe in your face, like the way you're just presenting yourself, or, you know, how you're having facial expressions, or maybe your emails are short, or
Productivity's down.
Productivity's down. Like all these little ways that you may not notice, but guess what? It's coming across. Yeah. And so the idea is to go, okay, if I'm experiencing rage from something that's happening at work with another person, how can I handle it in a way that serves me as well as the greater team, the greater good, whatever that may be? And so how can we do that? Maybe that's scheduling a time with your boss to say, hey, this came up in one of our conversations and I just felt like I wasn't really seen for the work that I was doing. And that really frustrated me. Like being able to have the tools and the language to figure out, I'm having this emotion. So what do I do with it? Because ultimately all of our emotions can serve us in a way of how we want to show up, how we want to interact, how we want to go in the world. But it's a lack of skill set to integrate those. So what we do is we let them live in isolation.
And oftentimes that emotion, kind of going back to how it spills over in scenarios that had nothing to do with it. Right? And sometimes that spills over into like your partner or your kids or whatever the case may be. And it's not their fault at all, but they still see the repercussions of that emotion you tucked away.
Every single person, no matter what your age is, can resonate with this example. It's the perfect example of coming home from work, school, whatever that may be, and you walk through the door and you slam it and you're really short, you're really quiet, and like you're just really peeved, and someone, whether it be a parent, a sibling, a partner, says something and you kind of just like blow your gasket.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with them.
It's because we've carried an emotion from one experience to another, and we haven't actually allowed ourselves the time to let that emotion move, let that emotion go, tap into our ways that we know to regulate ourselves and handle it so that it's not impeding and impacting other areas of our life. So that's a perfect, because everyone can, yep, I've done that, right? I've blown up at people, or, I've cut someone off driving and I've had a big reaction. Well, guess what? That reaction probably wasn't just for what it is. It actually has nothing to do with the person who cut you off.
Yeah. What's like the application in that for the kids then in school? So like, how did you see that? What was like the successful track to getting there with the kids?
Yeah. So the first one is all about actually being able to recognize emotions. So starting to develop your self-awareness, right? What actually is going on? How are you feeling? And then that's actually in a lot of this of what I'm sharing is coming through my training and work with Yale. And it's starting to build that capacity to be in those conversations, right? How often are you actually asked, how are you feeling? You're not. Everyone's like, yo, what's going on? How you doing? Good. Right? Like,
you don't actually talk about it ever.
No one goes, hey, Keon, how you feeling today?
Oh, wouldn't you love to know? Let me trauma dump on
right,
you.
Right,
Never.
Right. And obviously, like, as you build your capacity, there's a time and place and a way to navigate. Hey, maybe now's not the time to go deep into it, but what you start to do through those questions and that question specifically is you start to just allow people to take inventory on what's going on from an emotional perspective. From there, it's then about why? Why is that emotion there? We can all, the three of us right now, something could happen, someone could say something, and all three of us could have completely different emotional experiences.
Yes.
And that's because of us as individuals. So the next question from that is, well, why? Why are we feeling that way? Can we start to go deeper into understanding why that's existing? The other piece of it is labeling your emotions. People's vocabulary around emotions are like this.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm happy, I'm sad,
Yep.
I'm angry, right? There's like 5 words people know.
Mhm.
There's a huge range of emotions, and they're all different in their own way, shape, and form. Anyone who's listening to this and just wants to actually understand a little bit more, Brene Brown's, Atlas of the Heart. I'm like, it's going to come to me. Atlas of the Heart is a great book where she discerns every emotion and just starts to break them down. So the difference between anger and rage and joy and happiness, right? Just the little nuances.
synonyms, yeah.
Like the little ones where we would kind of go, well, they're the same.
Basically the same, Yeah.
She's like, sure, they might fall in the same category. There's differences to some of them. So that's a cool book for someone who wants to do that. And then the other piece of it, going back to the students and adults, is once you're able to label. So at this point, you've recognized, you've understood, you've labeled it, and now it's how do we express and regulate ourselves? So what tools, what strategies do I know? So going back to the rage, right? Peaceful protest, great thing to do. Maybe when you're experiencing rage, maybe what works for you is actually journaling, writing it out, whatever that may be. Going and doing that. But it all goes back to self. So sure, there's examples, sure, there's ways in which you can do it in a positive and effective way for yourself, but every person's going to be different. The way that you process and regulate might be different than the way that I process and regulate.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the real experience of understanding those pieces. And again, if you think about it, it's going from here to here. Because when I start to recognize, understand, and label, that has everything to do with me. But then when it comes to expressing and regulating, that has everything to do with the impact of others around me.
Yeah. I'm seeing a very big correlation between just that and also business, entrepreneurship, right? And I think the first thing that I noticed that you mentioned, Griffin, is the questions that you're asking.
Mhm.
You're asking questions, you're being curious, and you're asking smart questions. And then I think the other thing, just for our community, right, to draw into business
Sure.
mindset, things like that, because you're an entrepreneur, man. I'm seeing it. You're doing it. You're identifying the problem.
Mhm.
You're asking the question. You're figuring out how the market responds to that problem.
Sure.
And then you're going out and trying to find a solution for it.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you need to do to build a business. You identify a problem. You go into the market gives you the response, you respond to the market response, and then you find a solution.
Yep. Yeah, I was sharing with you guys before. I never woke up one day and was like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I never woke up one day and was like, I just want to work for myself.
Yeah.
It wasn't that. It was
You want to help people.
It was experiences as a classroom teacher, noticing gaps, experiences as a school administrator, noticing gaps, and just continuing to notice gaps, ask questions, and figure out ways to think outside the box to fill the gaps. And I was just having this conversation. It just so has led me here for now, right? Trying to figure out a way to proactively fill a gap.
And I think there's like something beautiful there to like pull out of that, because some of us get pushed in, some of us are methodical, some of us are sink or swim, some of us stumble into it, or for lack of a better term, kind of get like hustled into our own thing. We're like, how did I end up here? But now you have Come Home Collective,
Sure.
and you're building it out beautifully. All these different paths, all these uncommon paths,
Mhm.
right? But they all lead to the same principles, the same theme,
Yeah.
which I think there's like something there to draw out.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah. It's made it, I didn't really, it probably took getting directed into entrepreneurship to really step back and look at it, because when you're in the system, it's easy. It kind of just pushes you through. You don't really have to think much about certain things and you kind of just go. But definitely stepping out to go, okay, I have all these skills. I have this background. I have this mission. I have this belief. I have these values. How does this all show up? Has really challenged me to then go, well, what is the thread? What is the theme? What, and then now what is the North Star? And that continues to help me discern where I'm putting my energy, where I'm putting my time, resources, all of that kind of stuff.
That's a great set of mindfulness. I want to pick something. I picked up on something. How did you, directed to entrepreneurship? What do you mean? How did that kind of happen? Were you like inspired, or like what do you mean directed towards?
So I think,
so like, what did that look like, I guess, going from there and leaving and creating Come Home?
Yeah. So I think just for me, I think the root of it had always been, how can I impact in the best way possible? And I always wanted to make a big impact. Not that it was about me. I just wanted to be part of a bigger impact. And obviously through the progression of my career, it happened at different stages. And one of the things I started, so when I was early in my career, I wanted to be a principal. I was like, you know what? After that, I'll probably want to do something in the district office, superintendent, whatever that may be. But I think my passion and the work I was truly committed to doing took precedent over titles or those types of things. And also, as I was growing in my career, I was starting to notice how, what's the best way to put this? How much red tape existed.
Yep.
And so one of the things that made me lose sleep at night from a public educator perspective and a school administration perspective was asking the questions to make change for the success and impact on students, and being met with, well, that's just not how we do things, or, we've always done it this way, or, we don't have the resources or whatever to do blank. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, but how are we creating an educational experience where this student can thrive? Like not every person's the same. We can't just, so what are we doing? How are we proactively setting these things up? And a lot of it was met with the political aspect of, well, that's just not what we do, all this stuff. And I think what never sat well with me was people were able to just go on like with their day to day.
Yeah, and don't think about it again.
And I'm like, why do I care so much? Right? Like, no, this can't be right. We're supposed to be here for students. We're supposed to be educated. We're supposed to be service people. Like what? And I know this isn't a correct way to say it, but the thing that kept showing up for me was like, who are we to play God?
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
That blew my mind. That was just like, wait a second, we're making decisions and we're structuring systemically and all these things that are curated to a certain way or a certain lens. That did not sit well with me, because I was like, that shouldn't be what we do.
How did you have that perspective? That's like a very big picture.
Yeah.
Big lens. Like how, like we're playing God here. Like, yeah, I never thought about that being the systemic way it is, but it's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, how did you get to that perspective?
So I really just kind of credited it all back to my experiences in New York City public schools. Like everything I do today is driven by those experiences in the first, 3 to 5 years of my career, because it opened up my perspective, my way of seeing the world, seeing people, seeing how people live, interact, and just show up. Really took my lens from this to this. And so all of a sudden, when I was in those roles within schools, I wasn't seeing it like this. I was starting to look at it like this. And obviously for people listening, I was starting to see a bigger scope of all the different things because I'm just moving my hands right now.
Talk about big scope. You understood the perspective.
yeah.
There's people listening
Yep,
and not watching. Okay.
Yeah, there's some people listening and some people watching. And so for the people listening, I'm taking my hands. And so, but that's
the point.
But that's the piece right there, right? So instead of, and again, I credit my experiences there and the opportunities I had within New York City schools and also the work that I did with Yale, because just building my emotional intelligence allowed me to see that.
Yes.
Right. If I didn't build those skill sets for myself, I would live in my narrow perspective and bubble.
Yep.
But instead, I've developed tools. I've had experiences where I've been able to now open that up more to really think about accessibility, equity, all these different pieces. And so regardless of what demographic you are, what socioeconomic status you are, as a public educator and as the work Come Home is doing, I'm looking at the lens of how are we making this even across all playing fields? And that was the thing that kind of pushed me there, was seeing public education specifically not practice maybe what they preach.
Mm.
I want to dive into Come Home a little bit
Yeah.
because from our first conversation, from our first conversation, my understanding is you've kind of pivoted a couple times in how Come Home operates, right? Because I think from a previous conversation, you started bottom up, like you focused on the kids first, but the most recently, you're focusing on giving teachers the tools to then carry that on and trickle down that effect. Is that do I get that right?
A little bit.
Okay.
So Come Home's work, the work that I've done has never been rooted in directly to students.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. It's always been focused on the adults.
Okay.
Because the adults ultimately at the end of the day are the biggest impact on students. And so if you don't have a leader, right, whether for this conversation, whether you're the CEO, a manager, whatever that may be, right? If you don't have the skill set, you're not actually opening the space for those below you and those who you lead to be able to develop and nurture that as well. So our big focus has been adult learning, but there has been little iterations and different versions of what that looks like, all just driven through experiences, right? Go and do one thing and then go, oh, wait a second, how do we pivot and tailor this a little bit more and start to shape that?
How did you kind of build into place these systems for the adult learning? So like, obviously we've spoken a lot so far about these things personally, how you're experiencing it. Are you kind of providing that platform in the same way, or trying to give them the same feel in the way that you were experiencing and learning it? Or like, what system are you putting into place to educate them in these ways?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that I noticed, and this is just across the board, and I think it's also just societally as well, we don't have the actual education around this work. We don't have the education on how to develop your emotional intelligence. Everything we had just talked about, people haven't been properly trained and supported and grown in how to develop these skills. And so that's the gap. Right? That's the gap right there. Educators specifically have all been taught different content things, how to be the best reading teacher, what does instruction look like, how to develop curriculum, all these different types of things, but they're missing the skill set still around how to develop that. So what Come Home is committed to doing is developing and training the adults. And so what that looks like for us is training them similarly to the model that I did through my work with Yale, training them and then also coaching and mentoring them as well in terms of what does that look like? That's another piece that I'm really committed to, that I noticed a gap in, maybe outside of education, maybe different industries notice this as well. But implementation was like the biggest fail in the world in the education space. So you would get a lot of training, you would get a lot of development and knowledge, but you weren't actually supported on the translation back to reality, back to your classroom environment, your school setting, whatever that may be. And, obviously I want things to be sustainable and successful. And
Sure.
I want it to exist outside of me being there and the current teachers, or even within states, when those, the leader of the Department of Education leaves, I still want it to exist. And so how do we implement in a way that is sustainable? And so that's one of the focuses as well. So we train and develop, and then we support on the implementation side, helping them really make sure it's ingrained at the foundation of what they're doing within the classroom, as well as what they're doing in the schools.
Mm. Yeah.
I want to dive into this kind of parallel, because when I think of the kids, the students, I think of them as the clients slash the customers. But from your standpoint, I know you've kind of quoted yourself as, I didn't really see myself as an entrepreneur up until this point. I look at the teachers kind of like a B2B, right? Business to business.
Correct.
You're teaching the business is then trickling that down to their clients, their employees, so on and so forth.
And the whole system's B2B to C.
Exactly. So, right. So I think there's like a lot of parallel there, because you're going
Totally.
straight to whatever trickles down rather than going straight to the consumer,
Yeah.
the students, quote
Correct.
unquote. Right. And I think that's a very healthy and like scalable way to do that, especially for this space, because it does have to do with such subjective things like emotional intelligence and those things.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I mean, everyone, and I think our world just loves the new shiny next thing. And so we're often just trying to add rather than simplify. And that's really what the approach that I take with this work is like, let's simplify things. Let's stop adding all this stuff and let's just develop from within. But there's so many people who want to put things directly in the hands of the consumer, right? I.e. the student in my lens, right? Well, let's give it to them. That doesn't scale. That doesn't actually impede different aspects, different areas within a school building, right? It's through the adults who are developing the systems and structures and the ones who are providing the education and the content. And so, yeah, my direct connection is through the leaders and those adults, because ultimately the conversations that we're in, sure, there's a lot of information and a lot of research around what this work actually does for adults, and adults actually want it as well. And so there is a huge impact on adults specifically, but ultimately too is how are we shaping and evolving what education looks like, right? Because we want to really impact the students. And so that's where the conversation is, because we're focused on them.
That's actually very interesting. How do you come into so I want to touch upon the implementation piece, right?
Yeah.
You don't just come across the idea of, okay, how do we implement this? This needs to be implemented this way. I believe, I could be wrong, there was testing involved in that.
Sure.
In terms of just like the students and understanding how they move and receive things.
Sure.
These educators are going to be receiving and learning in different ways as well, right?
Absolutely.
And I would love to just, if you could teach our community in terms of their processes and their businesses and going through that. How do you go through that testing phases, or how do you know what's going to resonate with them? Like, how are you getting to those places?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple layers to it. And so I'm going to kind of just go off, and then if you need to redirect me, just redirect me back.
Do your thing,
Go
man.
for it.
But I think it first starts off with understanding where people are and where they want to go. That's a lot of what my conversations are. In my world, that's rooted in strategic plans, right? They sit down, they develop in the next 3 to 5 years. We want to do X, Y, and Z. And so as a school, what do we have to do to start making progress in that way? And so for me, it really, really helps when I understand and know where we're going, because then I can understand what my role is. I can ask the right questions to understand how I need to show up, how I need to support, what my interactions look like. And so that's from like a little bit of a higher level kind of view on things.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to the actual implementation support itself, it goes back to the relationships that I touched on before. It goes back to I interact with 45-year-olds the same way I interact with a 5-year-old. Just taking the time to understand who they are, what works, what support needs to look like. The exact same approach, the exact same tools that I have with students is the exact same approach that I've taken with adults that I've led who are on teams, as well as now partnerships through Come Home, because what support might look like for you might be completely different from
Yeah.
you. And my role isn't to have it all be the same. My role is to support you in how do we translate the common work that we're doing so that you two both experience success.
Simplification.
Simplification.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just mentioned that simplification. I think that there's a lot that people can draw from when it comes to that, is just the idea of simplifying things. I think in a lot of cases for our viewers, if you're developing something yourself, try to see things in a very simple way. Don't think of it as a big problem, because if you think of something as a massive problem, you'll tend to overthink, overcomplicate, and then the problem becomes even bigger than what it actually is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then you might be solving a problem that isn't the actual problem. You're going into something else that it doesn't even exist. You kind of curated it yourself.
Yeah. One of the things I love to say is do less,
Yeah.
right? Do less.
100%.
Do less as business owners, as entrepreneurs, as just people. We constantly want to add all the things, and we overcomplicate it. We make it really confusing. Like, things are already confusing.
Yeah. Why
Why
complicate it more?
complicate it? Right? I think the biggest catalyst for success is when we're able to simplify it. Right. And that's when I was going back before to just saying, like, understanding the North Star and what those pieces are. For me as an organization now, I understand what buckets we pour into. If it's outside those buckets, I'm not really interacting with it, because I know, like, I've simplified it. I've understood these are how we show up. Guess what? We'd love to support if we can. And if we can't, I'd love to put you in contact with someone who can. Or let me tap into my network and see if there's someone who can do whatever. You want to put a curriculum right in the hands of students? Okay, let me go figure out who that person is for you.
Yeah.
Right? I bet you I know someone.
And I
Founder
think
key
that,
number 7.
yeah, I was literally just about to say, no, you got this one.
Do it, man.
I was going to say, I think the bucket is what I really like, simplifying things. I
Yeah.
think for founder key number 7, keep things simple.
Mm,
Pour into the buckets that you know are going to add value, and be transparent enough to know, if I cannot help you, admit that, but I will get you in touch with the person who can. Because I know a lot of people who, just for the sake of the business, and in some cases, sure, I understand, but in most cases, I'd say they stretch themselves too thin, just trying to accomplish something that they
Yes.
said they would, and they stretch themselves way
Yes.
too thin.
yes. And you're not going to be sustainable, and you're not going to grow. One of the best examples I love to use of this, and this is going to resonate with everyone listening to this, is urgent care. Right? You go to a doctor, you're sick, or something happens, you go to urgent care. Right? Unless you're a frequenter of urgent care, which most people aren't, you don't know the name of the doctor who saw you.
Yeah,
You don't.
You're right.
You don't. But guess what? If you're a doctor who is a foot specialist, and
Sure.
all you deal with are feet,
Yep.
I got a foot issue. I gotta go see Dr. Sal. Oh, hey, I'm dealing with a foot issue. Should I go see Doc? Yeah, go see Dr. Sal. He does feet work. Be the specialist.
Yeah.
Be the Dr. Sal in that scenario. Don't be the urgent care doctor. No one knows who the urgent care doctor is, and no one's going to go to the urgent care doctor.
Yeah.
They're going to go for you for that quick tune-up,
Yeah.
but they're not going to go to the specialist.
Yeah, I think that that's a magical founder key, actually. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's amazing, and thank you for that. I
Yeah.
think that the idea of simplicity is also the idea of being within your own niche, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to capture a community, you want to capture an emotion from people, you need to start small scale. You can't go big, right? Because if you're going big, that's broad. You're not capturing anything. You're not
Sure.
resonating with anybody. You're not really touching people at their souls and hearts.
Yeah.
You have to identify your target, your community, and that's who you target. That's what you go after. That's your niche. That's who you care about.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll say to just add on to that is you actually start to build a lot of trust with people through just simplifying and kind of owning your niche. Because if someone's coming to me, just using that example that I gave, the hypothetical example of, if you want a curriculum just in the hands of students, let me know. But if I'm the person who's like, okay, I can develop that for you, like, they're going to be like, whoa,
Yeah.
like, wait a second. But there's actually a lot of trust that's developed when I go, you know what? You want to do that? We don't do that, but I think I might know someone in my network. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait, they're going to give my business to someone else, or they're going to actually put business to the side and really connect me to the person who's truly going to be able to help. That's going to strengthen that bond right there. Cause they're like, oh, they actually do care.
Yeah. And
Ingenuity.
I think on the flip side of that, right, it highlights they know where their weaknesses are, but it reinforces the fact it's like, okay, next time I come to them and they say they can do it, that means they can do it.
Yeah.
Right? They know exactly they can do it. Right? Because if they can't, they'll just pass me along and they'll be honest about that. But if they can really do it, they're going to do it.
Yeah. Cause if you're dealing with a heart issue and you go to a foot doctor, you better hope that that foot doctor isn't going to be like, yeah, I can take care of that heart for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah, exactly.
no.
Yeah.
Send them to the heart doctor, right?
Yeah.
Like that's exactly the case right there.
That's amazing. So as we're starting to come to about an hour and 10 minutes of this, we'll start to close things up here. I would love to ask you what's kind of next for Come Home, right? I think we're still in growing phases as we always are, and we're always expanding, growing, finding new things, new communities, new people to bring in, new betas, ideas. What's kind of next for you guys, the direction you're going, and how can people support it?
Yeah. So obviously, Come Home through the evolution of the work has kind of taken on a kindergarten so elementary through higher ed lane, which has been a lot of fun. It's helped me start to look at education all the way to industry as a pipeline, which is not sexy to say, but looking at it from a skill development lens. So continuing to partner with people, continuing to find the right people to build that out from a higher level of just how does that look is something that I'm really committed to doing moving forward. The other piece too is, my heart and my background has consistently been in public education. I went to undergrad at a private school. I've supported at private universities, but I really, really want the impact of Come Home to be in the public education space. So continuing to just find the right partners in the right spaces. I really want to be pouring more into inner city areas as well. And so, again, kind of through just my background and experiences, a lot of my heart are in those spaces. And so I think just as Come Home is growing, I'm just trying to redefine and put us in the right situations to really put our work where it's meaningful. And so I'm looking at it through a little bit of a broader scale, and then public education lens. So, I always appreciate people who can make connections if they know of anyone in public ed spaces.
I have something for you.
Okay.
We'll talk afterwards.
Okay. I love that. So, if people, the support from people really just comes through these conversations. And I think just following along and learning a little bit more about Come Home, learning a little bit more about, what's going on, and just supporting. I never have an idea of what support needs to look like. I think any type of support, whether it's, following certain things or, reaching out or anything like that, is just a kind of a boost in a good direction.
100%.
Yeah, I love that. As we close this out, it's the question that, as you know from the previous episodes, the long-awaited question. So in your perspective, what is one uncommon trait, character, practice, belief, system that you think our viewers can take out of here that they might be able to implement that has led you to success?
Yeah. I would say something that I've tried to practice and embody, and I use the word practice because it doesn't always stick. It's just an intention and a perspective I try to bring, but there's no such thing as failure. I really don't believe in failure. I think I believe in successes and lessons. And so what that has helped me throughout my career, this isn't just from an entrepreneurial lens. I've done this in the past, as well as it's being highlighted as an entrepreneur, is the fear of failure, the fear of going out there and reaching out to those people or putting that thing out there or whatever that may be for whatever reason with the idea of I'm afraid to fail. There's no such thing as it. It's either going to work or you're going to get feedback and information and you're going to learn a lesson and you're just going to adjust and keep going. And so, I would say that's the biggest thing that has really continued to help me push forward, and to grow is to really understand that failure doesn't exist. It's just either a success or a lesson.
And that's amazing. It's the idea of balance, right?
Yep.
You can't understand good without bad. You can't understand great without terrible. Life without death,
Yeah.
et cetera, success without failure, right? And it's all the perspective that you put on that that allows you to see this failure as a growth opportunity rather than a failure.
Yeah. And thinking about it through that lens allows you to take that same feedback, same experience, same information, see it through a different light and realize, oh, cool, I can now take this information. I can keep going.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs, founders, business owners, we maintain that mindset, right? Things don't happen to you, they happen for you.
Yeah.
Right. So something doesn't happen, you don't get punched in the mouth. It doesn't happen to you. This is a lesson to take out of it, right? You're going to get your teeth kicked in sometimes and it happens for you. And having that mentality over the long term, I think, is where separates the people that get weeded out into the people that can stick through it consistently over the years.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great point. Griffin, thank you so much for coming on today. For our viewers, Griffin has his own podcast as well.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
I do.
So you should go check it out. He has a great voice for it as well, if you couldn't
Yes,
tell
he
so
does.
far. If you enjoyed the conversation that we had today, you enjoy a lot of his mindsets and the things that he has to say, go check out his podcast. There's a ton more of that as well. If you like the things that we do, it's pretty similar, so you should go check it out anyways. He interviews, like he mentioned, people such as owners, doctors, educators, et cetera. So there's a lot to pull from our community as well to learn within things that translate. Griffin, just love to give you the space to kind of plug everything you have, your business, your personals, your socials, et cetera, the podcast.
Yeah. Yep. So the Come Home podcast is on everything, Spotify, Apple. The conversations are also on YouTube. Follow Instagram just at me. It's at Griffin Gervais. That's the best way to get to me. Website, comehomecollective.org. You get all the information. Simply just reach out to me and I can direct you where to go.
That's a great way to put it.
Nice and easy. I like it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I have been Keon. I don't have my socials yet, as we know. You can follow us at Uncommonality Podcast. You can see our socials on all across platforms, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, et cetera. We have our podcast, as you know, on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. This is Sal.
Yep. And you can find me at _Sal A. Perez and my business, Totem Wealth Management, at totemwealthmanagement.com.
Thank you for watching, guys. Yeah, it's been a good one.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Peace out.